for the upcoming 2024-25 budget. Now, the objective of the pre-budget report is to raise awareness of the government's fiscal and budget policy objectives and to establish what we will call an understanding in the community about how we look at various matters related to fiscal policy, which is taxing and spending, and budget policy, the numbers that are inside of the budget. The pre-budget report also serves to educate the public and encourage debates on budget strategy and how it effectively copes with current economic and social priorities. So tonight is without question an opportunity for you to learn more about the factors that are impacting the preparation of this year's budget and to give us your feedback as we continue with our preparations for the upcoming budget. The pre-budget report is something that we have done since 2011. It is something that carried over in the previous administration, and we have continued the practice as we found that it is a very good thing so people understand what the government is looking at when putting together the budget, and so that there are not surprises on budget day, but a budget that reflects the priorities and has certain feedback from a wide section of the public so it meets the needs of the island. So I look forward to the presentation today from MP Adams. I look forward to possibly engaging with some questions that you may have as we put together this budget. Thank you. MP Adams.
Thank you, Premier. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to quickly run through a brief presentation before we get into the questions. The topics for the presentation, there are 6 topics. First, we'll touch on our fiscal performance. Then we take a look at the local economy and recent credit ratings, followed by some of the relief that's been provided by the government over the last 2 to 3 years, some of the economic challenges and risks that we currently are facing, some of the policies that are under consideration, and then finally, we'll touch base on some of the spending considerations as well as we prepare for the upcoming budget. So in relation to fiscal performance, I think one of the key things and one of the main things that we want to be able to drive home is the fact that the government has reduced our deficits since the pandemic. And if you look on the graph on the right, you will see the implications of our recent performance as well as the most recent revised projections, where you will see at the very left of our graph is where we were at the peak of the pandemic. And so you recall the deficit that year was roughly $184 million. The very next year, our deficit moved up to 66 million. And then the latest revised estimates of our last fiscal year had a deficit of 47 million. Our projections for this year is 44 million. And as many of you know, we are aiming for a balanced budget in the upcoming fiscal year, which will give us, which obviously demonstrates that since the pandemic, the government has been reducing its deficits, so much so that we are now positioning ourselves to have a balanced budget in the upcoming fiscal year. And this is significant because this is the first this is aiming to be the first balanced budget in over 20 years. That is a significant accomplishment that we as a government are proud of. And ultimately, what that has led to, successive deficits, has ultimately led to us having a gross debt of $3.3 billion. And so we recognize that in order to address the debt, in order to begin to reduce our debts, we must first stop the deficits. And so this is why we are proud to be able to have a balanced budget, is because it is the first step to addressing the debt or addressing the debt. And I also wanted to highlight the fact that reducing our debt is an important objective of the government, so much so that on December 18th, we finished a debt repayment of $50 million, which begins the process of reducing our gross debt. But having a debt of $3.3 billion has its implications. Most notably, it comes in the expense of our interest expense. And so I'll draw your attention to the last the last two and the projected next two fiscal years, where in 22-23 our interest expense was 138 million, and this current fiscal year our interest expense is expected to be 130 million. Now, to put this into context, this is money that is being paid by the government to our bondholders. It is money that is leaving this island and serves no purpose or no benefit, to the people of Bermuda. And so the objective is to begin to reduce our debt so that we can ultimately reduce our interest expense so that we have more capacity to do more for the people of Bermuda. And I wanted to, if I can finish on this slide, you'll notice that this year the interest expense was 130 million, but our next 2 years it moves down to 127 million. This is a direct reflection of our $50 million repayment that we made last month. And so this is, again, a reflection of this government positioning ourselves to repay down our debt, which then has an implication of reducing our interest expense. And my final point that I say on the slide is the less we pay in interest, the more capacity we have for Bermuda and its people. And so I'm hoping in the screens that many of you hopefully can see these numbers, but if not, I can touch the salient points. Effectively, this is a comparison of where the government's performance over the first 8 months of last fiscal year compared to the first 8 months of this fiscal year. And so if I can draw your attention to some key highlights, the first you will notice is that we are ahead of projections, or ahead of where we were last year this time, by $30 million in relation to payroll tax. And the key piece to this is to remember that this is on the back of the government reducing payroll taxes for 86% of the workforce. This is a key demonstration that the economy is growing, that people are working, and that we are moving in the right direction, or in a more positive direction. Also, you will notice that land tax is a key driver, that we are ahead of where we were last year by 4 million. And then also transport infrastructure tax, which is ahead by performance last year by $3 million. This is a reflection, this is primarily covered by our cruise ship passengers when they come to the island. And so in essence, by being ahead of schedule, or ahead of where we were last year in terms of our cruise arrivals, this number, this figure will continue to improve. But so overall, at the moment, we are at about $13 million ahead of where we were last year. That is significant, and certainly, again, evidence that we are ahead of schedule. Now, we have here a surplus of $12 million, a surplus of $12 million for the first 8 months of this current fiscal year. But we are mindful that there are some large expenses that are expected to be repaid within the next 3 months. And so that ultimately will put us in target, or put us on target of where we project to be over the fiscal year. So if we can take a bit look and to help demonstrate where we are economically, the Minister of Economy and Labor recently provided an update where we are. But for some key takeaway indicators as to where we are economically, the first is our GDP growth. Our GDP growth, when we take into consideration inflation, is about 2.3%. Now, this is comparing where we were for the first 6 months of the first 6 months of 2022 compared to the first 6 months of 2023. We've also noticed that there's an increase in employee income by 5.9%. Now, most notably, individuals will say, well, that is a reflection of an increase in employee income when it comes to the international business community. Well, that's not just the case, because we've noticed that quite a number of industries, quite a number of sectors have seen an increase in employee income, such as the hospitality industry, such as the retail sector, such as the construction industry, such as public administration, all of which have seen increases in their employee income. My next point is, I hope that you can see that there's an increase in the number of jobs in Bermuda. So when you look at where we were June of 2022 compared to where we were in June of 2023, we saw a 3% increase in the number of jobs, and most notably, 73 of which are Bermudians who have been now employed. And then we move into the increase, or the improvement, sorry, in our tourism industry. Most notably, we look at our air arrivals that has improved by 43%. Our cruise arrivals have improved by 54%. Recently, it was announced that the government has received its highest revenue from cruise ships than ever before. And that is something that we can all be proud of as a country. And then finally, one of the key indicators that I wanted to drive home is that new business registrations has improved, or new business registrations has now been up to 173. So new businesses are coming to the country, are registering, seeing what we're doing, and certainly setting up shop here in Bermuda. And then one of the key things that are near and dear to me is credit ratings. And I reflect and I sort of emphasize constantly on credit ratings because it drives home the fact that they are independent assessments of this government's performance. So we remove the political agendas, we remove any sort of influence, and we have world-leading credit rating agencies who come to the island and assess our performance and publish their assessment. And so if I can give you some quotes of the most recent reports from S&P, they are quoted in saying that our expectation is that the local economy will remain healthy, supporting government finances, limiting the need to increase gross debt, and supporting the territory's external position, including current account surpluses. Moody's issued their report in December of last year, where they said Bermuda's policymakers has a continued commitment to a prudent fiscal stance, which will help stabilize Bermuda's debt burden in the next 2 to 3 years. And KBRA recently in their report said Bermuda's ratings reflect its commitment to fiscal restraint and consolidation, even if slightly delayed. The ongoing recovery of tourism and KBRA's expectations for durability in its status as a financial hub. And so again, these are independent endorsements of this government's performance, and something that we as a country should all feel proud of. And so our next slide speaks to just some of the relief that this government has provided Bermudians in trying to relieve some of the financial burdens that many of us are facing. So this government continues to manage the difficult balance between fiscal prudence and reducing the financial burden for the people of Bermuda. And so the first one I want to highlight is that we've reduced payroll taxes for 86% of the workforce. That is something that is a huge accomplishment. And so if we were to, because we've reduced payroll taxes, and in fact, we've reduced payroll taxes for the 4th time last year, or yes, this current fiscal year, and so much so that the average worker has saved approximately $5,000 in payroll taxes because of these payroll tax reductions. We've also stuck to our commitment by increasing pensions by the rate of inflation, because we recognize the important role that our seniors play. And so, and the shoulders that we stand on. And so we as a government continue to stick with our commitment by increasing our pensions, the pensions for our seniors. We've also implemented one of the highest minimum wages in the world. We recognize that there were individuals who were earning less than $16.40 an hour, and we as a government decided something had to be done about it. We recognize that the challenges that an increase in cost of living is facing, and so we felt it was important to not only implement a minimum wage, but put one to help move us in the right direction. Another key point I would like to highlight is the fact that we've increased government scholarships. Our government scholarships over the last 6 years has steadily increased every single year from 1 million to the fact that we have now increased it to $2 million because we value our students. We want to see them pursue their career of choice. We want to see them get into the best schools that they possibly can so that they can come back and contribute to this country. This government continues to invest in our students. Our next point is we've increased financial assistance benefits and child daycare allowance. It is important as a government that we continue to support those that are most vulnerable. And so I will remind the public that the vast majority of financial assistance actually goes to the seniors and disabled. And so we wanted to make sure that their quality of life is not hampered as well. And then we've increased the child daycare allowance. And it's an important fact. And it's important because not only have we increased the amount that an individual receives, but we've also made it eligible so that more people are eligible for the child daycare allowance as well. And so it's important because we recognize the challenges that some of our young families are facing and those perhaps considering starting a family. And so this government has stepped in and increased the child daycare allowance. We've also eliminated customs duty on a number of various items, whether they be school uniforms, whether they be aggregate for construction purposes, whether they be for grocery items and the like. Where and when we can, we've eliminated customs duty to help reduce some of the cost, to ultimately reduce some of the financial burden for the people of this country. We've also reduced interest rates or reduced mortgage rates and down payment. One of the things that we are absolutely proud of is our mortgage guarantee program, which has now seen over 50 young families now on the verge of owning their own home, many of which would not have been able to do so had it not been for the government's mortgage guarantee program. That is this government pledging in its platform to reduce mortgage rates, and it has actually done so. We've reduced the mortgage rates, and we've also reduced the down payment requirement so that the standard rate for banks would be 20%. We've now cut that in half so that the down payment requirement is now 10% for those who choose to participate in the mortgage guarantee program. And the final point, and this isn't the last thing that we've done, but it's just the last of one of the key things that I wanted to highlight this evening, is that we've eliminated land tax for our charities and nursing homes. This government recognizes the important role that our charities and nursing homes play in the community. And so any way that we can contribute and help to improve their operations and the quality of their operations and ease some of the financial burdens that they are faced with, this government continues to step in as and when we can. But like all countries, this is not unique to Bermuda. All countries face economic challenges and risks. And Bermuda is not immune. And so part of our discussions, part of our pre-budget report, part of our deliberation as a government is to decide or take into consideration some of these economic challenges and risks. And first is the energy and climate change. So we have to prepare and recognize that sea levels are rising, recognizing that the frequency of our hurricanes, recognizing the increase in temperature, and sort of preparing ourselves and asking how are we preparing ourselves to brace ourselves and better buffer ourselves for the impact of the energy and climate change. Next is immigration and labor force. It is no secret that we have an aging population, and so it is the focus of this government to put initiatives in place that will help to create jobs and improve and increase the working population in this country. And then growth and diversification. Um, the economic growth continues to be a focus of this government to be able to improve, but also diversify our economy. And so it is mentioned in our economic development strategy, as well as or within our economic recovery plan, some of the government's initiatives to diversify our economy, whether it be through fintech initiatives, whether it be through medical tourism and the like. It is this government's focus to improve and diversify our economy as best as possible. And then finally, pensions, health, and other contingent liabilities. In several consecutive budget statements, we reflected, and not only the budget statements, but also pre-budget reports, we've reflected or recognized the underfunding of our both CPF and PSSF pension funds. And so this government continues to work with industry experts to position ourselves to be able to ensure that these pension funds are sustainable for the foreseeable future. And so when we get into the pre-budget report and even tonight's conversation, it is as much a process for us to speak about where we are economically, where we are fiscally, what does the independent assessment say, but it is equally just important to receive the feedback from the public. It is equally as important for us to be as transparent as possible. And so we have reached out to various stakeholder groups, as we traditionally do, and they have provided a number of initiatives that they would like to see the government consider. And so as part of our deliberation, as part of our consideration, we include these initiatives in the pre-budget report so that we can receive feedback from the public on their thoughts and feelings on these particular initiatives. It is vital that I continue to emphasize that these proposals are not final. These are not the government proposing these particular initiatives, but rather the government asking the public for their feedback on what has been proposed to the government. And so some of the key initiatives that have been proposed to the government is the amendment to the new hire relief. Also, the reduction of land tax, particularly for those in the hospitality industry. Then we, as a revenue generating initiative, to increase the boat licensing fees. But also to expand the list of items subject to customs duty relief, particularly with a number of grocery items. It's always sort of proposed to the government to consider expanding those lists to help bring some of the cost of grocery items down. Also, what's proposed to the government is further reduction of employer payroll tax, particularly for the hospitality industry. We recognize the impact that pandemic has had on all of us, but in particular, our hospitality industry. And so it is something that the government is considering in terms of how can we best assist the hospitality industry to recover and get back on stable footing. And then finally, it's a reduction of fees for work permit applications. And so these are some of the things that we are considering. And so we've opened we're opening channels, if you will, for the public to provide their feedback. But there are also spending considerations as well. And so we have to think about or consider things such as investments in our economic development strategy. And so there are action items within the economic development strategy that we recognize are key to the economic growth that we wish to see. And so these are in spending or investment, as I would like to look at it, into some of these key initiatives to facilitate economic growth. And then investment in technology. So many will recall that in September of last year, the government was a victim of a cyber attack. And so we want to be able to invest as best we can into our technology so that we avoid anything like that from ever happening again. And then the investment in critical infrastructure. And so we as a government, have gone successive years with our infrastructure becoming underfunded. And so we recognize that we can no longer continue to do so. And so whether it be with the road paving, whether it be with the improvement of our bridges and the like, we recognize that we can no longer continue underfunding these critical infrastructures. And so these are sort of the things that the government has to consider to ensure that we improve Bermuda and the quality of life in Bermuda. And then there's the continued investment in affordable housing. We are proud to be able to roll out in successive months affordable housing, and that is something that is a significant accomplishment of the government and something that the government aims to continue to invest in the upcoming fiscal year. And then recognizing that we have an aging population. So what are some of the things, some of the initiatives that this government can put in place to help address this critical issue? And so in conclusion, before I turn it over to our Premier to answer questions, I thought there were just some key takeaways that I wanted to drive home before we get into the question period. First is the fact, and highlight the fact, that the government is reducing its deficit. So much so that we are positioning ourselves to deliver a balanced budget for the first time in over 20 years. Second is that the government aims to deliver a balanced budget. Third is that reducing our debt has begun. We have already made a $50 million repayment towards our debt, and it is our plan to, once we have reached our balanced budget, to have surpluses thereafter, and with those surpluses will be used to help continue to reduce our debt. But the reduction of our debt has already begun. The fourth point is that our economy is growing. We talked about GDP growth. We talked about unemployment on the decline, the improving of our tourism sector. Our economy is absolutely growing, and it is the focus of this government to continue to facilitate this economic growth. The fifth point is independent endorsements. This is not just MP Adams or the Minister of Finance speaking these words of encouragement and speaking on the fact that we are heading in the right direction. These are world-leading agencies, have all shared their endorsements to say, at the very least, that we are heading in a positive direction. And then finally, before I turn it over to the Premier, is to reflect on the fact that this government has provided relief to the people of Bermuda as and when it is fiscally prudent to do so. It is a difficult balance. We would always love to do more, but it is important that we continue to do so in a manner that is fiscally prudent, because that is ultimately the balance that we as a government take very seriously and that we are quite proud of. And so with that, Premier, being the introduction, I will open it up. As you know, we tabled our pre-budget report in December of 2015, and so
2025.
What did I say?
2015.
December 15th.
Yes, gotcha.
December 15th. Sorry, December 15th. And we've received a number of questions via social media, via openbudget@gov.bm, which I will continue to encourage anyone. So if we do not get to your questions, or we are unable to get your questions in the time, then I would encourage individuals to email us at openbudget@gov.bm. And so with that, Premier, I will kick off. And the first question that we have is, what would you say is the number one priority for the government from an economic perspective?
Well, MP Adams, before I get into answer the question, I want to certainly thank you for your presentation. It's certainly informative, and budgets are not easy. It's one of the things I remember stating in Parliament last year, that this year we could have technically had a balanced budget if the government did not provide tax relief to 86% of workers and 80% of businesses, and at the same points in time make significant increases in investment or capital expenditure budget, which is in infrastructure, because I believe that's important. And my focus has always been that it doesn't matter if you have a balanced budget if you have an unbalanced country. And so it's important that we try to go along this path to get to a balanced budget while doing whatever we can to take care of the needs of our citizens. But on the question of what would you say is the number one priority from the government from an economic perspective, the number one concern that I hear on the doorsteps is certainly affordable housing. It is without question a result of the growth that the economy has experienced. And despite the fact that we've invested $15 million into affordable housing and continuing to increase the number of affordable housing projects, you said more and more comes online. There's multiple projects also in the private sector. We clearly need to advance these matters. One of the things we hear from, whether it's locals or whether it's international business, this is putting particular pressure on them. And so from that aspect, I would say that that is certainly number one. Number two, of course, is continued economic growth and diversification. But economic growth and diversification will be held up if there are not places for people to live. And so from that perspective, if, housing prices, which are now beginning to increase as we see in the CPI, where housing was remained level for a while and now it's beginning to pick up, we need to make sure we address that. That's the reason why I put that significant investment. That's the reason why I'll be announcing further matters to try to stimulate additional housing developments inside the city of Hamilton while continuing to support the housing corporation. So on that, I would say, housing number one, economic growth and diversification number two. But if we cannot grow our economy, if we do not have places for people to live and to work. And so that is around, making sure we bring more units online while also making sure that we do more to tackle matters related to vacant and derelict.
Absolutely. So, Premier, corporate income tax tends to be a hot topic of the day. There are many differing views and perspectives as to what is corporate income tax, how much are we expecting to receive, things of that nature. But ultimately, one of the questions that we received was, when can the government expect to receive money from the corporate income tax?
Well, I mean, that's not a difficult question. It's one, the corporate income tax that we passed last year doesn't come into full effect until January 2025. The rules from the OECD are that the taxes are due certainly in a period of time after the end. So if they start in 2025, it'll be the end of 2025, and then taxes will most likely be due in the next year at some point in time the next year. Now, the International Tax Working Group, which we put together, are still going back and forth over the way that we're going to do it. Some countries, people pay quarterly. Other countries, people pay annually. There's all these things in which we have to understand. But I would say that the earliest that the government should bank on receiving any proceeds would certainly be, there may be some may come in 2025, but I would most likely say the budget after the next budget, if that makes sense. So the 2026, 2027 fiscal year is, I think, the time when we'll see the full impact of the global minimum tax. But unfortunately, that is 2 budget cycles away.
Thank you. So you mentioned the Tax Reform Commission, which is ultimate segue into our next question, where they say there are some that believe that the proceeds from the corporate income tax should be applied directly to our debt. As Minister of Finance, what do you think we should do with the money?
Well, I can tell you what I think we should do. And I think that the budget statement might give some clues. But I think what's important when we look at something as major as corporate income tax, we should make sure that we have the broadest based assessment. That is the reason why the Tax Reform Commission has representatives from both political parties, has representatives from employers, has representatives from unions, has representatives from local business, has representatives from international business. And we want to ensure that whatever it is that we are doing actually works and has buy-in from a wide variety of sectors. One of the things that we always said in opposition is that to have a strong and stable economy, you need to have stable policy making. And it's always challenging if policies can change, significant policies can change from one government to another. And so when we're talking about something with corporate income tax, that is the reason why I felt it was best to make sure there's a wide cross-section of persons who provide that input. Now, the Tax Reform Commission certainly will be dealing with a critical issue. And that critical issue is, what do we do when the revenues are far greater than we expect? Because it's going to be very difficult to budget for a corporate income tax. Nowadays, when we budget, we know there's payroll tax, we know there's customs duties. It is relatively easy to budget because you understand. But because corporate income tax focuses on the incomes, and our largest sector is insurance, and in some years, insurance, there may be a number of hurricanes or earthquakes or fires or catastrophes, which cause insurance companies not to make money. That means that there could be less. And so it's going to be a very challenging exercise. I think that the best perspective for the government to take and for the country to take is a balance. I think that there is a balance between making sure that we reduce the cost of living in the country and the cost of doing business. So whether that is dealing with matters that affect everyone on a daily basis, on taxes, on those particular matters, and also critical investments in our infrastructure as well. When it comes to debt reduction, clearly there can be early retirement of debt, and early retirement of debt may reduce interest payments as well. And so those are all things that be factored in. But I don't think that it should be one or the other. I think that we have a lot of different needs, whether it comes from housing, whether it comes from roads, whether it comes to healthcare, whether it comes to education. There's a number of different things. And I think that there is an ample opportunity to spread it across the board while making sure that we are reserving the money so we can ultimately reduce our debt.
Thank you. Premier, a little switch of topic, if you will. We recognize that the budget period is always a busy period for the government.
Very busy.
And there was a question that we received that was focused or asked, essentially, can you give us a bit of insight as to what goes behind the budget process?
Well, the budget process starts, and I think it might actually start in the budget book where it gives you a whole timeline. So members of the public can go ahead and take a look at the budget book. So every year it's spelled with the timeline. But the budget is presented in the House of Assembly in February, prior to the government's fiscal year that begins in April. However, the budget process starts for the government in February, where there are budget training sessions, where there's the initial results from the previous year, where we begin to look at what is the approach. During the months of October and November, individual departments start preparing their budget submissions. And by the time they come to December, they start working with their ministers and they send those submissions into the Ministry of Finance. Here in the Ministry of Finance, we collate all of those various submissions which have come in, both for current account expenditure, which is the day-to-day expenses, for salaries, to make sure that the lights are kept on, the various things of which we do, supplies and others, and also capital expenses, which are the investments that we may make in products and equipment, whether that's additional IT equipment, additional heavy equipment, additional buildings, so on that side. So we look at what comes in, and then taking into account of all of what comes in, and inevitably, ministers and others will request more money than there is available, because there's always more projects that can be done. But the challenge, of course, that we do have is that we need to be realistic in what can be delivered in any given year, and also to make sure that we're holding fast to our pledge to take the country to a place where we stop borrowing money and are in a position to save so that we can repay money when monies become due. And so that process goes to December, and in January in earnest, ministers will have multiple meetings. So earlier in cabinet today, we discuss budget submissions. There'll be another discussion in cabinet next week around budget, and there'll be another discussion the following week. Around the end of January, we kind of finalize all the numbers, and that gives the Ministry of Finance the time to go ahead and get the budget books produced to make sure everything is in place, working with the various departments, the various controllers, and so they can prepare that so that the budget can be presented. So it is a very complex process. One of the things I will say is that the government is actually considering moving to a 2-year budget process because the amount of work and energy that is done, and if you look, the budget period finishes in April, you've got May, June, July, and then right after you're back to the budget process again. And it does take a lot of time from public officers, the same permanent secretaries who are enforcing things, the controllers in various departments. So those are one of the things that we're examining and discussing whether or not we move to a 2-year budget process and what are the implications of that. There's other countries that have moved to a 2-year budget process, and that's something we're considering as well.
If I move on, the next question is that there are many people who believe we could have reached a balanced budget a long time ago if we simply cut the size of the civil service. To that you say?
I think that it's a simplistic, it's a very, very simplistic view that is not grounded in reality. And budgets are hard, and there's always a lot of political noise. That's just the nature of it. I mean, the latest political noise I got is I was apparently in Switzerland. I didn't know. So apparently I was in Switzerland, and a press inquiry came for the World Gazette asking, when did the premier leave for Switzerland and how much does the trip cost to go to the World Economic Forum while I'm in Canada debating. So, there's a lot of political noise, but oftentimes what happens is that people try to just pick on the simplest thing which they find. Reduce the size of civil service means there's less community nurses, there's less teachers, there's less persons to do the work, there's a reduction of government service and provision. But what's interesting is the fact that in these budget times, as we've been continuing to go along, the government has largely made sure that we have not increased the overall size of public service. We've made significant investments in information technology over the years, where we see some departments, such as the Department of Planning, that is completely online, and more departments continuing to advance those processes. But it's important to note, and the last year's budget covered it, that there are not a significant amount of change in the number of people that were employed when the PLP came back to office in 2017 until now. Last year's budget actually reported that there was a reduction over the last 5 years. And the size of the civil service, as a comparison to the broader budget picture, is the lowest level it's been since 2006. So we are making progress. So it is not fair to say that we could balance the budget if we just cut the civil service. That is not correct. But there are requirements. So for instance, when there's a health crisis or the hospital, where we have to make sure that funding goes there, there's a number of things that we have to spend money on. I'm hopeful that we'll get to a balanced budget this year. It will be certainly a challenge. We're going to continue to work to meet that goal, but it's not as easy as it sounds, because every time you cut in one place, that means that there is an impact somewhere else that affects somebody, a service that somebody received, support for someone who's vulnerable, challenges for those aspects. And so the government wants to make sure that we are very careful in how we make these decisions.
One of the questions that continue to come up, and I'm glad that we have you this evening to ask you directly, is the fact that tax collections seems to have improved, but there is still a large amount of uncollected taxes in the government books. What is the government's plan to collect on these taxes?
Well, MP Adams, one of the things I want to address is that, it's important that from the documents that we put out, oftentimes those things, we want to make sure those things are shared so people know and understand. So on the issue of taxes and accounts receivable, one of the things that we targeted in this year's budget was that we wanted to collect $7.5 million of back taxes throughout the fiscal year. I'll just read from the pre-budget report, if I may. The government targeted to recover $7.5 million of past due taxes, and as of November 2003, we had collected in excess of $15.7 million in past due taxes, doubling the amount that we had budgeted to receive in this year. That was only up until November, so there was still 4 months of the fiscal year left. And what is this as a result of? This is a result of the capital investment of which I was speaking about, which makes departments more efficient, brings data together so that the public officers can be more efficient. It didn't come from hiring more people in the tax office. It didn't come from anything else like that. It came from the investments to make sure that we are being more efficient with the work. So the Office of Tax Commissioner had a new debt management system. And from that perspective, that has certainly made easier targeting. So we are continuing to collect that. What you may hear in this year's budget is additional measures to make sure that we improve the tax culture. One of the things that the pre-budget report did state is that the Office of Tax Commissioner has begun initial meetings with the Public Prosecutions, which is prepared to begin prosecutions for non-filers that have deemed to have the ability to pay and just willingly do not pay. So there's work that we have to do inside of that tax culture, and we're continuing to push that forward.
One of the questions that we just got in was in relation to pensions. So a lady says, I am 40 years old and I'm scared I won't have a pension when I turn 65, or at the very least, whatever pension I do get will not last for the rest of my life. How did we get to this state? What are the government's plan to address this issue?
Pensions are not just a challenge in Bermuda. Pensions, as we can see, are a challenge globally. And it comes from the basics of what a pension is and how pensions were put into place. When pensions were put into place and the de facto accepted retirement age of 65, which is here, it's interesting to note that when pensions were put into place, the average life expectancy was less than 65. Now we know, without question, that the average life expectancy is higher than 65. And as people live longer, that means that there is more money that is coming out of the pension system, which creates a challenge in the long term. And so, but there's only three ways to fix a pension problem. It's not as though if you can do any type of magic. There's three ways to fix a pension problem. You either increase contributions, which means that every week when you pay that amount in social insurance, the government needs to have you pay more. Or you reduce benefits, which means that the system is paying out. That means you don't give increases for the cost of living, or you just reduce the amount of money at which you are paying out, which of course is probably not something that will lend to social cohesion, especially amongst our senior citizens and those who may rely on social insurance payments. And the third thing in which you do, of course, is to increase the retirement age. Those are only the things of which you can do in pensions. The other variable is your investment returns, but because they are pensions, they're typically invested in secure investments, which means the investment returns are not significant. They're in a certain space and instance. And so that is what we have to deal with pensions. Now, from the government's perspective, there's two particular pension funds that are most concerning. The first is you call it PSSF, but members of the public may not know what that is. That's the Public Service Superannuation Fund. That's the fund that funds the retirements of public sector employees and retirees. And so from that particular aspect, we have consulted with the unions on a broad basis, and we look forward to bringing legislation this year that will fix the pension problem for the PSSF. We've also been consulting around changes for the social insurance, which in law is called the Contributory Pension Fund, but we all refer to the Social Insurance Department of Social Insurance. And that is a little bit more challenging. And I say that it's more challenging because there are the things that are needed to fix. What we want to do is to put our pensions on a sound footing. We don't want to say right now the life expectancy of our pension fund is 20 years. We want to push it out to 15 years and kick the can down the road. So we started from the perspective of we want to fix the problem once and for all. So this is no longer an issue that will be set future generations of future administrations. And so from the perspective which we have, we examine it, but the things are, there's a combination. So you either increase the retirement age, reduce benefits, which as we said is difficult to do, or to increase contributions. And so there needs to be a combination of an increase in contributions and an increase in the retirement age. The initial proposals are stuff that we felt may have been too onerous for the economy at this point in time. People are challenged with the cost of living, and to tell them that, okay, well, we want you to pay an extra $1,000 or $2,000 a year in social insurance to make sure the system is good. We're still examining those. We're seeing how we can tweak the proposals and what are the other considerations which we could have. So we're going through another round of consultation. But I will tell whomever wrote in that question, I expect to receive a pension too. And B. Adams does, all public officers. Those persons work in the Ministry of Finance. And so we are committed to fixing this problem. It is not going to be an easy problem to fix. No question about it. But we believe that we have a path, and we are continuing that consultation with both unions and also with the international business sector, with the local business sector. And once the cabinet comes to a place where we think that it's something that is settled, there will certainly be a broad consultation with the public prior to us making final decisions and then going to Parliament to make changes.
Thank you. Another question that has come up says road paving, Premier. Road paving comes up time and time again. So the question is, will there be sufficient funding in this budget for the repaving of our roads? When can we expect it to begin?
So I'll answer the last part of that question first. It has already begun. And we see sections of roads in various parts of the country which are being paved. But this gives an opportunity to speak about a broader economic challenge, which is austerity. And that is a word that people may hear, but they may not understand what it is. And that is where a government cuts its spending and delays projects to make sure that we can stay inside of our fiscal targets and hit our fiscal targets. That is the reason why I make the comment that we could have delivered a balanced budget last year. That would have meant that we did not increase the investment in capital expenditure, which are necessary for housing and roads and all those other types of developments. And so from that perspective, the way in which I look at it is that this has built up over time. It has. And we know that we've been in a constrained and difficult budget situation for a while. We're coming to the end of it. Through a lot of hard work of public officers, through government and others, we are coming to the end of it. And so we will see that there's additional funds that may be able to be used for capital investment. On the issues of roads, however, it's not just us buying a new asphalt plant, because I've said that we are going to buy a new asphalt plant. Our asphalt plant continues to break because it's old, and when you have limited capital funds, you don't spend that money to buy new stuff. You continue to try to repair, and then it continues to break down. We are buying a new asphalt plant. We are buying new road paving equipment. I told the Minister of Public Works to please proceed with that. And so, yes, when we have the reliable equipment that will be here, we'll be able to accelerate that pace. There will be sufficient money in the budget for road paving, and I look forward to the Minister of Public Works sharing those details. Coming out of austerity is a big deal. Investing capital is a big deal. We haven't been able to invest in capital a lot. If you look at the capital budget this year, which was $95 million, that was the largest capital budget that this country's had in 15 years. We've had a very long time, and the estimates are that you should probably be doing around 10% of your total assets and investment in any given year. So that means that the government's capital expenditure should really be closer to $200 million a year to maintain, to upgrade, to make sure we do these things. So there'll be a time as we continue to ramp up our capital plan to make sure that we aren't spending additional money on repairs, on things that are past their useful life. You see now we have new buses, we have to move on to other types of items and making sure we refresh the government's capital stock. But the answer to the question is, it has already begun. And yes, there will be funding for capital to make sure that we continue to improve our infrastructure.
Thank you. Interesting topic. In September, the government was a victim of a cyber attack. So the question is, what level of investment are we expecting to make to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Well, the first thing is that we have to do whatever we can to try to minimize the chances of something that occurring again. but it is difficult to eliminate the possibility. And that's why we have an entire, insurance industry, that exists to manage risks, et cetera, on that particular basis. There will be, as stated in the pre-budget report, as you stated in your presentation, pressures to increase further the amounts of money of which we've invested in IT. It's important to note that IT capital budgets over the past 4 years, the highest that they've ever been. There's been significant investments of which we've made in IT. I think in either this year's budget or last year's budget, when I said half of the capital acquisition budget is actually in information technology investments to make sure that we can continue to streamline government services. And so there is going to be that investment to continue to invest in IT infrastructure, but it's not easy. And we have to balance all things because there'll be some persons who say, well, it might be more important to invest in this, important to invest in that, etc. We are going to continue to make those investments. And I hope that they will continue to, I know that they'll continue to bolster our cyber defenses. But the thing is that we have to continue to stay on that wicket and continue to make those investments in time after time. And now the fact that we are approaching a balanced budget, there'll be less constraints on capital. We want to keep current account spending, at a reasonable level while trying our best to increase capital account spending because we know that we have to prepare and we know that we have to invest in the future. We talk about technology, we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about customer service. All of those things require investments from the government of Bermuda, and it's important that we're making those in IT investments so that Bermuda can be at a good place.
Awesome. Premier, I'm getting the signal that it's time for us to wrap up, but I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question.
Okay.
Individuals often have a feeling of, this process, if you will, in terms of transparency. And so the question is, has this government incorporated past suggestions that it's received and then followed up by executing them?
The answer to that question is a very simple yes. Every single year that we've done a pre-budget report. So whether it was Minister Dickinson when the Tax Reform Commission report came out, I want to say in 2018, up to the cycle, speaking about the proposed from the Tax Reform Commission rental tax, which was not put into place, but that was one that was a proposal from the Tax Reform Commission. Whether it was even last year, I can refer to last year's, where there was a provision that went out insofar as what we're looking to do with payroll taxes on the employee and employer side, and that was changed and modified based on the feedback which we had. Some of the suggestions last year, which I know did make it into the budget statement directly, about elimination of land tax for charities and nursing homes, elimination of customs duties for school uniforms, reducing sugar tax. All those are things that came in from suggestions. And just the process is when we first get ready to it, we go out to all of our stakeholder groups, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, whether it's the unions, whether it's international business and all the rest, and ask them for their views about the upcoming budget. And that's where some of those proposals that MP Adams said he's sending out. So the short answer to the question is yes, we have, certainly we do it every year. And I'm proud of the open budget process because I think that it helps increase the understanding of budgeting. But in addition to that, it makes sure that budgets are better received as they have wide and broad support and input.
Thank you. Well, Premier, that hits us on the hour. And so I would thank you for taking the time to make yourself available to public to answer some of the questions that they have. I think this is an important process as we get ready for the upcoming fiscal budget. And so with that, I will turn to you for some closing remarks, and then I want to, but also just thank the public for taking their time on the busy schedule to ask their questions, and I hope that you learned something during the session.
I mean, the only thing that I'll say in closing, thank you, MP Adams, for your continued work. The pre-budget report is online. You can see it at forum.gov.bm. The deadline for submissions is certainly tomorrow evening, so that would be January 17th. Feel free to make your suggestions, share, write into openbudget.gov.bm if you have any questions, or you can go ahead and post your suggestions on forum.gov.bm. As we move forward through this budgeting process, continues to be informed. The government does put out significant information around what we're doing on the budget, And the best way to be informed is to take information from the official government sources, which do contain a lot of information that isn't that technical, a little bit of reading, but isn't that technical, so you can have a better understanding of the way the budget process works. Again, the deadline is tomorrow, January 17th, in the evening, and you can find the pre-budget report on forum.gov.bm. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.